Welcome to the Leadership Lovers Podcast. I'm your host, Will Gladhart, CMO at the Culture Think Tank. At the Culture Think Tank, we empower leaders with metrics that strengthen culture, drive performance, and return. We're here today to learn about the actions leaders have taken to address organizational change. Today, our guest is Chip Higgins, founder and author at Bizzix. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
It's great to be here, Will. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, let's begin by having you share with our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and also your organization and leadership.
Yes, definitely. So I'm a 40-year ex-banker. I worked for three large regional banks over 4 decades, and I'm mostly with owner-managed businesses. Yeah, I hate to say small because I never feel that way about them, but most people would say small businesses, but I always like to say owner-managed. I work mostly with those businesses, and I think as my banking career progressed, I just became more aware of needs that were beyond capital. Just gravitated toward coaching. I became a member of the John Maxwell team in 2011 when he started that team as a founding member, and tried to do some leadership things with small business owners, and ultimately started Bizzix in 2019. It's a coaching practice that really has a focus on momentum. So that's the concept, is if we can master the equation for momentum in physics and apply it to business, I think that we have a pretty good framework. So that led to my book that came out in April of last year, 2024, The Bizzix Way, where kind of map out the whole formula. It's been a great ride. I mean, it's fun to be an entrepreneur at my age. I'm still as passionate as I've ever been about just trying to get people past that first 5 years. I think that's what I'm uniquely focused on, is the failure rates really haven't changed in my banking career. And I think with a model or a mindset or a framework, I think there's a better chance than 50-50. And that means a lot to me.
I really love that you share that. I think simply because the numbers haven't changed, the numbers for either success, failure, whether that be a financial, business, etc. There's a lot of gaps in leadership. So I really appreciate you're looking to fill some of those with your expertise and experience. So we'll be discussing 3 questions today as a warm up to our conversation. Would you share why you believe a healthy culture is critical?
Yeah, so it's a very important part of my book, actually. Underlying that formula is mass times velocity, but you really can't have velocity without energy. And the first chapter of the book is dedicated to energy. A lot of our energy comes from the gap between where we are and the vision for the company or for ourselves. It's a vibrational field. To me, culture is the power grid, and I don't care what size organization it is. You've got to have a structure that conducts energy from top to bottom, side to side. If you've ignored culture, you're going to have a power outage somewhere. It's just a matter of time. I say in some of my talks, even the smallest things can cause a disruption. I had a model train when I was a kid, when my parents would leave me in the basement alone and would just stop. At first, I couldn't figure out what was wrong, and it turned out to be just one clip between 2 pieces of track had gotten separated.
Right.
And I use that in my talks all the time as a demonstration. I think it's true in business too. I view it as a power grid. Obviously, the side benefits of having a great place to work, it's enjoyable and all that type of thing. But as far as moving a business forward, you got to have something that the energy runs on.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, where not only is it from top to bottom, but also the information has to be communicated out, sent out, and returned back to leadership for it to for it to be effective. It's been our experience, and you've probably encountered this as well in your many years of not only working with business owners, but in the finance industry. Leaders tend to struggle with 3 key areas: people, process, and profit. In your role, could you identify which of these 3 areas represented a cultural challenge, either for one of your past organizations or a current client?
Yeah, I think the process part, I'm speaking mostly from my banking background. That's where most of my career was spent. But I think that looking at the banking industry, I started in 84. We didn't have email. We didn't have, there's all kinds of automation that came our way, but it was still very manual type of process. And you watch what happened to the banking industry over that time period, and going from 14,000 plus banks to about 4,000 today. It became so process oriented and automation oriented. And I think that combination of things created just a lot of stress in systems. The curve of technology and the automation caused a lot of problems about changing systems a lot for processes and that type of thing. But I would say culturally, there are a few problems that stand out about building processes that make you more effective and efficient. And There's a lot of grief in it for a lot of people trying to standardize systems with people that have become masters. You're looked at by the company as like, Chip really knows what he's doing on that topic. There's a company wide initiative. You find out there's a lot of other ideas out there. And all of a sudden, there's a system, kind of an invisible system that is actually doing it different than you were. And I think that creates a lot of grief in the system, a little fear and anxiety. But I think the big heat comes from designing a system that ultimately doesn't work and it feels worse than where you started from. That's where I found the most heat. It's like for all the best intentions of automating something that people were left out of the discussion. You find out all the really nitty gritty nuances of what people do and how the automation doesn't support it. That's when people get mad. It's like they don't even know who to yell at. The system's not working. They'd rather go back to what they were doing before, the learning curve. I mean, all those types of things. So I've always felt like people were well intentioned. Sometimes you have recruitment problems finding the right person for certain roles, but I would say by and large, the organizations that I worked for, the process engineering and implementation was a real challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, especially as leaders are looking at AI now and all
Hmm.
other tools of looking to take people even further out of the process. But there were originally people and culture and some sort of element around that specific process or ownership or knowledge
Hmm.
before there was a software or there was an artificial intelligence or there was some other solution. I think that's a really valid point, thinking about how do you balance that people
Yeah.
process piece, but also what's the right mix. As you looked at some of those challenges, were any of those something that you could share that negatively impacted the organization? And then we'll kind of flip and then talk about the positive side.
I think that, in banking in particular, I'm sure this is true of every industry, but I just know banking how it works. It's like we were trying to create systems that allowed the customer interface to begin in a process and flow all the way through it to the back end where basically the bank examiners would come in. Did you get all the information? Did you follow procedures? Did you, I mean, all those types of things. I think for a couple of the banks that I worked for, there was a lot of emphasis on the back end where you would get in trouble with regulators, auditors, that type of thing, and not necessarily what the user interface would be like and what the people at the line would be dealing with. And so, what I found was lulls and plateaus in business. Every business has a pipeline. You're trying to predict results for the market. Just finding that things were getting hung up and pipeline targets were being missed because the system was more designed for safety than execution with the customer. Yeah, I think that's just a huge lesson of like how many people it takes to engineer a system and who you really need to pay attention to in the process. That's just such a sensitive thing. I mean, I can talk about the business result of getting a plateaued pipeline where things aren't closing and you're saying, well, we're going to get it next quarter or whatever. But you know how it is. Well, like right behind that are a lot of angry people. They're getting pushed by management. When's it going to close? Why is it not going to close? And, you start trying to share the truth about how the system is working. And, it feels like finger pointing, just kind of abdicating your responsibility for getting things done. And, just it creates tremendous amount of heat in an organization when it doesn't work. I would say I don't think that's uncommon. It always comes down to the results and the sales and throughput that you're hoping that process is going to enhance.
Yeah, I think that's really valid of having that open forum for either discussion or when there's a negative impact either across the culture or the
Yeah.
organization that you can, as a leader, can turn that to actually thinking about, okay, how do I take that feedback, digest it, and then turn it
Right.
to how do we take the next steps together
Yeah.
instead of everyone feeling like they're either on a spinning disc or that things are out of control, nobody has a direction, no one understands
Yeah.
their role clearly. So, is there any one thing that you identified that helped impact culture and leadership positively as you work through some of those challenges, or even with people you work with today?
I really think it's when you're building a process, there has to be a high component of local ownership. I think that most companies are not engineered to internally navigate a big process implementation. Usually somebody's coming in from, an organization that has a platform or specific knowledge about how they're going to do that. I think when there's a gap between selecting a vendor and turning them loose on the employees for interviews and field audit when there should have been an intermediate step. It could be really energizing for a culture to be that inclusive and asking questions. I think that really doing a lot of work in house before you engage the consultants or the implementer, platform provider, or whatever, it's really healthy culturally to vet all that out inside the house rather than having strangers come in and talk to people. And then here's the system. And you don't even know if executive management has even vetted out and you really push back on some of their assumptions and that type of thing. I think that it is a lot of work, but I just feel like it's such a critical cultural thing that you've got to have ownership of it in the company before you engage with a provider. It seems like an easy way to go, just like, yeah, come in and do the interviews.
Right, right. I mean,
Yeah,
right.
you'll do that too. Right.
Yeah, you take all the responsibility as
Right.
I think you're really reinforcing. We had a case study that we did a number of years ago with a business that, just as you were describing, was an implementation. And what leadership discovered was, one, management was responsible for 90% of the rollout. Two, management didn't understand the why or wasn't able to explain to the workforce what was happening and how is it going to impact
Yes.
work
Yeah.
process, the whole thing. And literally, they stopped the entire implementation for 3 months to work it out. And literally, after that 3 months, everything blew through seamlessly but prior to that, the level of anxiety was super high in the organization. Well-being had cratered. The number of lost time requests or people requesting out of work
Yeah.
couldn't deal with this.
Can't do
I
it
mean,
today, boss.
there was a component and there was a operational impact directly to that organization. And once leadership figured that out, they put the brakes on everything.
Oh,
Yeah, the vendor stayed out, and then they were able to resolve the challenge and move forward very quickly. I think you're pointing out something that's really important to think about, not only from a leadership perspective, but like also managers and the workforce really has to understand as a whole what your next steps is, and that impacts everything across the organization. Chip, as we wrap up today, is there anything else you'd like to share or add for fellow leaders?
I would just say culture is an investment. It's a huge energy investment. I think sometimes we're deluded into thinking it's just going to happen magically because people are together and you figure it out. I think the best organizations map it out before they start doing business. I mean, they know the values and they know how they're going to demonstrate, reinforce, and evaluate people on values that ultimately to a culture. Sometimes for smaller businesses, especially in the startup mode, it's just like, well, I want to get my product to market. Then things start moving fast, and you find out it's a huge gap that for all the energy you have, you can't distribute it. I mean, I go back to that principle. It's like,
Right.
you're really excited about it, but no one else is feeling it. I would just encourage people to really spend a lot of time on culture. It's been written up in so many books that it's the winning attribute of a company, and it really requires a lot of time, but the payoff from that investment is astronomical.
Absolutely. Well, Chip, I've enjoyed having you on the Leadership
Well,
Lab
thank you. Thank
podcast.
you so much for having me. Great conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you for joining us on the Leadership Levers podcast. Find all our Leadership Levers episodes on the Culture Think Tank website at www.theculturethinktank.com or listen on your favorite streaming platform. We'd love to hear from you about the challenges you have faced as a leader. Tune in weekly as we invite leaders to share their experiences in strengthening culture and performance, one action at a time.